Hey guys. Hey Brittany. Hey Cool Gamer. Hey Peas. Hey Lori. I'm just gonna get right into reading. I'm tired. I've had like maybe 2 hours of sleep. I've been on all day. That's not your fault. That's my fault. Hey Patricia. Yeah, I'm still up. I'm autistic. I'm just gonna get right into reading, and after this, I have some dishes to do. And take my dog for a walk, and then I'm going in my room, in my bed, and I'm gonna put on. I don't know. I want to watch something to do with Halloween, so I can see if I can get my little man in there with me. Probably go to bed early. Hey, SD. Maybe go get some. Hey, Brenda Paws. Ugh. Yeah, after the day I've had, eh? All right, so I'm still on Fires in Your Cities, January 26th to March 17th, 1971. Hey, Kira. So Bugliosi has a question, and it says, "Isn't it true, Leslie, that before the trial started, you told someone that Charles Manson ordered these murders?" The answer was, "I had a court-appointed attorney, Marvin Park, who was insistent on the fact that I was..." Keith interrupted her, objecting that we were getting into the area of privileged communications. I noted to Judge Older that Leslie herself had mentioned Part by name and that she had the right to waive the privilege. Okay, of course, Mouth Canarek says he objected and goes, "Well, aware of what I was hoping to bring up." Van Houten says, "Mr. Canarek, will you shut up so I can answer this question?" I had a court-appointed attorney by the name of Marvin Pratt. He had a lot of different thoughts, which were all his own, on how to get me off. He said he was going to make some tape recordings, and he told me the gist of what he wanted me to say, and I said it. Question: what did you tell Mr. Part? I don't remember. It was a long time ago. I asked her if she told Part that Manson had ordered these murders. Sure, I told him that. Did she tell Part that Manson was along the second night and that they were stopped at Waverly Drive? Manson got out and entered the La Bianca house. After a number of evasive replies, Leslie angrily answered, "Sure, I told him that." The court says, "We will take a recess at this time." Van Houten says, "Mr. Bugliosi, you're an evil man." Hey guys, I didn't expect anybody to show up. Like, I was still going to do this anyways, but I've been on all day. I figured you had enough of my yap. Autistic, you do not have to be here unless you want to hear the rest of this, or this book that I'm reading. Go lay down. You are off my duties. And Mr. Bugliosi was born in Mr. B was born in 1971. Hey, Am. Yeah, I took a little break. Hey, Felony Melanie. Yeah, me too. Hope you feel better. Autistic. Each of the family witnesses denied that Manson hated blacks. But in the light of what I recently learned, several put it in a very curious way. When Fitzgerald asked Squeaky, did he love the black man or did he hate him? She had replied, he loved them. He is his father. The black man is Charlie's father. Gypsy had testified, first of all, Charlie spent nearly all of his life in jail. So we got to know the black people very, very, very well. In fact, they were like his father, you know? Leslie had said something very similar, adding, if Charlie hated black people, he would hate himself. During a recess, I asked Manson, Charlie, was your father black? What? He seemed startled by the question, yet whether because it was such a crazy idea or because I found out something he didn't want known, I couldn't tell. There was nothing evasive about his eventual response, however. He denied it. He seemed to be telling the truth. Yes, I wondered. I still do. You're eating? No worries. Oh, get some rest, woman. You're as, oopsie. You're gonna say you're as bad as me. I know, even when I should be in bed, it's like, nope. The next witness was no stranger to the stand. Brought back from the New Hampshire at the request of Irving Kanarek, Linda Kasabian was again sworn. Fitzgerald, Keith, and Shin had opposed calling her. Kanarek should have listened to their advice, as Linda again came over so well that I didn't even cross-examine her. None of her previous testimony was shaken in the slightest. Linda, her husband, and their 2 children were living together on a small farm in New Hampshire. The footloose Bob Kasabian had turned out to be a pillar of strength, and I was pleased to hear that their marriage now seemed to be working. Ruth Ann Morehouse, a.k.a. Osage, age 20, once told Danny DiCarlo she couldn't wait to get her first pig. Repeated the now familiar refrain. Charlie was no leader, but the rattlesnakes liked him. He could play with them, and he could change old men into young men. Adding a few more fictional touches to the copyright motive, she claimed that Bobby Beausoleil was the father of Linda Kasabian's second child. I asked her, "You would do anything to help Charles Manson and these 3 female defendants, wouldn't you?" When she evaded a direct reply, I asked, "You would even murder for them, wouldn't you?" I could not take a life. All right, let's talk about that. Do you know a girl by the name of Barbara Hoyt? On the advice of her attorney, she refused to answer any questions about the Hoyt murder attempt. By law, when a witness refuses to be cross-examined, that witness's entire testimony, can be stricken. This was done in her case. Thanks, Patricia. Easily the weirdest of all the witnesses was Steve Grogan, aka Clem, age 19. He spoke of the anagrams on his brain, answered questions about his father by talking about his mother, and claimed that the real leader of the family was not Manson, but Pooh Bear. Mary Berner's child by Manson? Kanarek complained at the bench that Older was smiling at, at Grogan's replies. Older responded, "I find nothing whatsoever funny about this witness, I can assure you. Why you would want to call him is beyond my comprehension. But that's up to you. No jury will ever believe this witness, I can promise you that." The youth who beheaded Shorty Shia appeared to be a complete idiot. He grinned incessantly, made funny faces, and played with his beard even more than Manson. Yet it was more than partly role-playing, as several of the very careful replies indicated. Clem recalled accompanying Linda, Leslie, Sadie, Tex, and Katie one night in a car. He claimed that Linda had given them all as Steve first, and he insisted that Manson was not along. But he was very careful not to say that this was the night of the LaBianca murders, to avoid implicating himself. Many of his responses were also exact quotations from Manson. For example, when I asked him, "When did you join the family, Clem?" he replied, "When I was born of white skin." Wow. I also asked him, since it had been brought out in the direct examination about his arrest and Barker raid, what he had been charged with. I inquired. "I was arrested on a breach of promise." "Breach of promise? Some girl you made a promise to, Clem, or what?" "It was a promise to return a truck on a certain date." "Oh, I get it. Sometimes that's called Grand Theft Auto too, isn't it, Clem?" I'm tired. I'm sorry. The defense called the next witness, Vincent T. Bugliosi. At the bench, Fitzgerald admitted that this was an unusual situation. On the other hand, in this case, Mr. Bugliosi had been an investigator as well as prosecutor. Day Shin questioned me about my interview with Susan Atkins and her testimony before the grand jury. "When did I feel Susan hadn't told the grand jury the whole truth?" he asked. The reasons noting, among other things, my belief that she had stabbed Sharon Tate. "How did you come to that conclusion?" "She admitted it on the witness stand, Mr. Shin, for one thing. Also, she told Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham that she stabbed Sharon Tate." Shin was not trying to reinstate the deal in which the DA's office agreed not to seek the death penalty against Susan if she testified truthfully. As Older told him at the bench, Susan Atkins took the stand in this case under oath and testified that she was lying at the grand jury. If there had been any agreement, that in itself would have been enough to negate it. Keith asked me if I had either heard the tape Leslie made with Part or discussed its contents with him. I replied that I had not. Kennerec's cross-examination went so far afield that Judge Older finally terminated it. Others who took the stand in succeeding days included Aaron Stovitz, Avil Younger, former Los Angeles District Attorney and now California State Attorney General, attorneys Paul Caruso and Richard Calabero, and promoter Lawrence Schiller. Every aspect of the December 4th, 1969 agreement, the taping of Atkins' account, the selling of her story, her grand jury testimony, and her firing of Caballero the day after her meeting with Manson was discussed. Shin's most strenuous cross-examination of the entire trial took place when he had Schiller on the stand. Shin wanted to know exactly how much Susan's story had earned and in which bank accounts every penny was. Shin was to receive Susan's share for representing her. During my cross-examination of these witnesses, I scored a number of significant points. I brought out, through Caruso, for example, that during the December 4th, 1969 meeting, he had stated that Susan Atkins probably wouldn't testify at the trial because of her fear of Manson. Kennerec, however, scored one of the biggest points for the prosecution. In questioning Calabero, Atkins' former attorney, he asked, "What did Susan Atkins tell you about the language written in blood at these 3 homes?" Calabero says, "I told you not to ask me that question, Irving." Apparently convinced that Calabero was hiding something favorable to his client, Kennerec repeated the question. Caballero sighed and said, "He told me that Charles Manson had wanted to bring on Helter Skelter, and it wasn't happening fast enough. He used the word pig, and it was for the purpose of making them think that Negroes were committing these crimes, because the Panthers and people like that are the ones that used the name pig to mean the establishment, and that was the whole purpose of it. That Helter Skelter wasn't happening fast enough, and Charlie was going to bring on the ruination of the world, and this is why all the murders were committed. I asked you not to ask me these questions, Mr. Kennerec." Having failed in the attempt to sell the copycat motive, the defense now switched to a new tactic. They called a number of psychiatrists to the stand, hoping to establish that LSD had affected the minds of the 3 female defendants to the extent that they were not responsible for their acts. It was not a real defense, but it could be made to seem a mitigating circumstance, which, unless thoroughly rebutted, might tip the scales in favor of life imprisonment. Their first witness, Dr. Andre Tweed, professed to be an expert on LSD, but almost all of his testimony was contrary to that of acknowledged experts in the field. Tweed claimed he knew of one case where a youth, while under LSD, heard voices which told him to kill his mother and his grandmother, and he did just that. On the basis of this single, unidentified case, Tweed concluded that people may perform homicidal acts while under the influence of LSD. It was also his opinion, he said, that LSD probably caused brain damage. On cross-examination, I brought out that Dr. Tweed had only talked to Patricia Carmichael for 2 hours. He had not read the entire transcripts or interviewed any of her friends or relatives. He had never done any controlled research in the field of LSD and had only lectured once on the subject and had written no papers on it. When I asked him why he considered himself an expert, he rather replied, "What is an expert? But what the beholder thinks he is from his experience. Many people consider me an expert, so I have accustomed myself to assuming that I am." What? Do you consider Dr. Thomas of UCLA an expert in LSD? Yes, I do. More than yourself? I'm not in position to judge that. I will leave that to others. Do you consider Dr. Duke Fisher of UCLA an expert in the field of LSD? Yes. I then brought out that 2 men had written a paper entitled "The Problems of LSD and Emotional Disorders," in which they concluded that there is no scientific demonstrable evidence of organic brain damage caused by LSD. Tweed now had to admit that was correct as far as present evidence went. On December 24th, 1969, Patricia Carmichael had been examined by a mobile Alabama psychiatrist, a Dr. Claude Brown. Since Tweed had based his conclusions in part on Brown's report, I was given a copy of it just prior to my cross-examination. It was a bombshell, as my next question to Dr. Tweed indicated. In forming your opinions with respect to Patricia Carmichael, did you take into consideration that she told Dr. Brown that on the night of the Tate murders, Charles Manson told her to go along with Tex Watson? After numerous objections and lengthy conferences at the bench, Dr. Tweed admitted that he had considered this. Still later, Patricia was recalled to the stand, where, though she denied the truth of the statement, she admitted that she had told Dr. Brown that this was so. We now had a perfect score. Mason had called Sadie, Katie, and Leslie to the stand in an attempt to exonerate him. Instead, I had now proven that each of the three had previously told others that Manson was behind these murders. There were other surprises in the Brown report. Carmichael also told the doctor that she had fled to Mobile because she was afraid of Manson finding her and killing her. That on the day of the Tate murders, she was coming off an acid trip and wasn't on any drugs that night, and that following the murders, she was always fearful that they would be arrested for what they had done. But Charlie said nobody could touch us. This later statement proved that Katie was well aware of the consequences of her acts. Although harmful to Manson, this could only be helpful to Fitzgerald's client, Patricia Carmichael. However, it was not Fitzgerald who brought this out, but Keith, after Fitzgerald had concluded his examination. This was important since it was obvious from their questions that the defense attorneys were trying to imply that the three family defendants were insane at the time they committed these murders. Under California law, an insanity plea must be entered before the start of the trial. A separate sanity plea is then held after the guilt trial. The defense, however, had not entered such a plea at the proper time. Therefore, in one sense, the question of whether the defendants were sane or insane was irrelevant, since this was not an issue which the jury would have to decide. In another sense, however, it was crucial. This could strongly influence their vote on the penalty they were to pay. Suddenly, I was not only having to prove Manson's guilt all over again, I was also having to prove that the girls were legally sane. In most states, including California, the legal test of insanity is the McNaughton rule. Among other things, McNaughton provided that if a defendant, as a result of mental disease or defect, did not realize what he was doing was wrong, then he is legally insane. It is not, however, that he personally believed his acts were not wrong. Were this so, every man would be a law unto himself. For instance, a man could RAPE a dozen women, say, I don't think it's wrong to RAPE, therefore evade criminal punishment. The clincher is whether he knows that society thinks his actions are wrong. If he does, then he cannot be legally insane. And deliberate acts to avoid detection, such as the cutting of telephone wires, eradicating prints, changing identities, disposing of incriminating evidence, constitute circumstantial evidence that the defendant knows society views his acts are wrong. Earlier, Dr. Tweedy testified that Patricia Carmichael didn't believe these murders were wrong. I now asked him on cross, in your opinion, when Patricia Carmichael was committing these murders, did she believe that society thought it was wrong to do what she was doing? I believe so. Bugliosi stated no further questions. Hey, Cinderella. Oh, even my ass hurts. Oh, I've been sitting on it too long. Whew. Oh. That's better. I got a cushion. On March 4th, Manson trimmed his beard to a neat fork and completely shaved his head because he told newsmen, I am the devil, and the devil always had a bald head. This story just gets more nuts as I read through it. That's the thing, though. It's not even a story. It's true. Interestingly enough, this time, the three female defendants did not follow Manson's example, nor, when he occasionally acted up in court, did they parrot him, as they had in the guilt trial. Obviously, it had got across to them, albeit belatedly, that such antics only proved Manson's domination. While denying that LSD can cause brain damage, the next witness, psychiatrist Keith Dittman, testified that the drug can have a detrimental effect on a person's personality. He also stated that a person using LSD is more susceptible to the influence of a second party, and that Leslie's use of the drug plus Manson's influence over her could have been significant factors in causing her to participate in a homicide. Van Houten says, this is all such a big lie. I was influenced by the war in Vietnam and TV. Holy crap. Liar, liar, pants on fire. On cross-examination, I got Dittman to concede that not all people react the same to LSD, that it depends upon the personality structure of the person ingesting the drug. I then brought out that Dittman had never examined Leslie, therefore, not knowing what her personality structure was, he couldn't say what effect, if any, LSD had on her mental state. Now, turning this around, not having examined her, could he say for certain whether she did or did not have inherent homicidal tendencies? Keith on redirect asked Dittman, what is meant by inherent homicide tendencies? That a person has, let's say, more than the average human being, a killer instinct. Psychiatrically speaking, do some people have greater killer instinct than others, in your opinion? Well, some people have a more covert over overt hostility and aggression. In that sense, they are more capable of committing crimes of violence, such as a murder. Dr. Dittman had just articulated one of the chief points of the final argument I was preparing to give at the close of the penalty phase. Dr. Joel Fort, the almost legendary hippie doctor of hate, didn't look the part. The founder of the National Center for Solving Social and Health Problems was 40-ish, dressed conservatively, talked quietly, didn't have long hair. In fact, he was bald. Angered by his testimony, Manson shouted, if he ever seen a hippie, it was in the street while he was driving by in his car. Manson's anger had good cause. Even on direct, Dr. Fort was more helpful to the prosecution than in the defense. The author of one book on drugs and co-author of 11 others, Dr. Fort stated that a drug by itself does not perform a magical transformation. There are many other factors. On cross-examination, I brought out one. Fort said, it was my feeling, after examining Leslie Van Houten, that Mr. Manson's influence played a very significant role in the compassion of the murders. Another very crucial point came out on cross. To negate the defense's new argument that the girls were on LSD during the murders, and therefore less responsible for their acts, I asked Fort, isn't it true, doctor, that people under the influence of LSD do not tend to be violent? This is true. Still attacking the prosecution's theory of Manson's domination, Kanarek asked Fort, now, do you know of any cases where someone has, other than in the Frankenstein type of picture, do you know where someone has sat down and programmed people to go out, let's say, and commit armed robberies, burglaries, assaults? Do you know of any such instances? Yes, in one sense. That is what we do when we program soldiers in a war. The Army uses a peer group technique and the patriotic ideals that are instilled in citizens of a particular country to bring about the pattern of behavior. Dr. Fort was typical of many persons who, though opposed to capital punishment in principle, felt that these murders were so savage and senseless, so totally lacking in mitigating circumstances, that justice demanded that these persons be sentenced to death. I learned this in a conversation with him in the hall outside court, in which he stated that he was extremely unhappy that he had been called to testify for the defense in this case. Greatly concerned about the stain the Manson family had cast on all young people, Dr. Fort offered to testify for the prosecution when I brought Charles Tex Watson to trial, an offer which I later accepted. It was in just such a hallway interview that I discovered how potentially damaging to the defense their next witness could be. By learning that Keith intended to call Dr. Joel Simon Hodgman during the afternoon session, I cut my lunch hour short so I could spend a half hour interviewing the psychiatrist. To my amazement, I learned that Maxwell Keith hadn't even interviewed his own witnesses. He was calling him to the stand cold. Had he talked to him for just 5 minutes, Keith would never have called Hodgman. But the doctor who had interviewed Leslie felt that the use of LSD wasn't an important influence on her. Rather, he felt there was something very seriously wrong with Leslie Van Houten. In his testimony and the psychiatric report, he wrote following the examination, Dr. Hodgman called Leslie Van Houten a spoiled little princess who was unable to suffer frustration and delay of gratification. From childhood on, she had extreme difficulties with impulse control. When she didn't get her way, she went into rages. For example, beating her adopted sister with a shoe. From a position of a lower perspective, Hodgman noted, it is quite clear that Leslie Van Houten was a psychologically loaded gun which went off as consequence of the complex intermeshing of highly unlikely and bizarre circumstances. Hodgman confirmed something I had long suspected. Of the 3 female defendants, Leslie Van Houten was the least committed to Charles Manson. She listened to Manson's talk of philosophy, but it wasn't her trip, nor could she get that into Charlie sexually, and that bothered her a lot. I couldn't get it on with Charlie like I could with Bobby, she said. According to Hodgman, Leslie was obsessed with beauty. Bobby was beautiful. Charles was not physically. Charles was short. That is something that always turned me off. Yet she killed at his command. Keith asked Hodgman, Doctor, did you ask her whether or not Mr. Manson, during her association with him, had any influence over her and her thought process and in the conduct and activity? She denies it, but I don't buy that. Why don't you buy that? Well, I don't understand why she would stay on the scene that long if there was nothing there for her on some unconscious basis. As I observed in my final argument, many came to Spawn Ranch, but only a few stayed. Those who did so because they found the black-hearted medicine Manson was peddling very palatable. According to Hodgman and talking to him, Leslie professed a kind of primitive Christianity love for the world, acceptance of all things. And I asked her, well, professing that, how can it be you would murder someone? She said, well, that was something inside of me too. Maxwell Keith should have stopped right there. Instead, he asked Hodgman, how do you interpret that? I think it's rather realistic. I think that in reality, it was something inside of her, despite her chronic denial of the emotional aspects of herself, that a rage was there. Nor did Keith leave it at that. He now asked, when you say a rage was there, what do you mean by that? In my opinion, it would take a rage, an emotional reaction to kill someone. I think it's unquestionable that feeling was inside of her. Bearing in mind that she had never seen or heard of Miss LaBianca, in your opinion, there was some hate in her when this occurred. Well, I think it would make sense, make it easier for her not to know Miss LaBianca. It's hard to kill someone that you have good feelings for or towards. I think that there was anything specific about Mrs. LaBianca. Let me make myself clear. Mrs. LaBianca was an object, a blank screen upon which Leslie projected her feelings, much as a patient projects his feelings on an analyst whom he doesn't know. Feelings towards her mother, her father, toward the establishment. I think she was a very angry girl for a long time, a very alienated girl for a long time, and the anger and rage was associated with that. Hushman was articulating one of the main points of my final summation, namely that Leslie, Sadie, Katie, and Tex had hostility and rage within them that pre-existed Charles Manson. They were different from Linda Kasabian, Paul Watkins, Brooks Poston, Juan Flynn, and TJ. When Manson asked them to kill for him, each said no. Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Carmichael, and Leslie Van Houten said yes. So there had to be something special about these people that caused them to kill, some kind of inner flaw apart from Charlie. Though he had badly damaged his own case, Keith had tried to put the hat on Manson. Fitzgerald, in his examination of Hodgman, did just the opposite. He sought to minimize the importance of Manson's influence over Leslie, asking Hodgman what Manson's influence actually was. He received this reply. His ideas, his presence, the role he played in his relationships to her, served to reinforce a lot of her feelings and attitudes. It served to reinforce and give her a way of continuing her general social alienation, her alienation from the establishment. So, really, all you're saying is that A, Manson could possibly have had some influence, and B, if he did have some influence, it would only contribute to the lowering of her restraints on her impulsiveness. Is that correct? Yes. So any influence Manson had on Leslie Van Houten, in terms of your professional opinion, is tenuous at best. Is that correct? Let me give you another example that may make it clear. Suppose someone comes in and says, let's eat the whole apple pie. Obviously, your temptation is stimulated by the suggestion, but your final decision on whether or not to eat the whole pie or just one piece comes out of you. So the other person is influential, but is not a final arbiter or decider of that situation. Someone can tell you to shoot someone, but your decision to do that comes from inside you. Canarac, when his turn came, picked up the scent. And so you are telling us then, in layman's language, that when someone takes the knife and stabs, the decision to do that is a personal decision. In the ultimate analysis, it is. It is a personal decision of the person who does the stabbing. Yes. Ironically, Canarac and I were now on the same side. Both of us were seeking to prove that, even independent of Manson, these girls had murder within them. Manson was very impressed by Hodgman and at first wanted to be interviewed by him. I was relieved, however, when he later abandoned the idea. I wasn't greatly worried about Manson conning Hodgman, but even if Hodgman didn't buy Manson's story, Canarac would make sure he repeated it on the stand. Thus, using Hodgman as a conduit, Manson would get almost everything he wanted before the jury without being subject to my cross-examination. Hodgman found all three girls much evidence in their history of early alienation, of early antisocial or deviant behavior. Even before joining the family, Leslie had more emotional problems than the average person. Sadie actively sought to be everything her father warned her not to be. She thinks now, in retrospect, Hodgman noted that even without Charles Manson, she would have ended up in jail for manslaughter or assault with a deadly weapon. Katie first had sex at 15. She never saw the boy again, and she suffered tremendous guilt because of the experience. Manson eradicated that guilt. He also, in letting her join the family, gave her the acceptance she desperately craved. Of the three, Hodgman felt that Sadie had a little more remorse than the other two. She often talked of wishing her life were over. Yet he also noted, one is struck by the absence of a conventional sense of morality or conscience in this girl. And he testified, she does not seem to manifest any evidence or discomfort or anxiety about her present circumstances or her conviction and possible death sentence. On the contrary, she seemed to manifest a remarkable peacefulness and self-acceptance in her present state. According to Hodgman, all three girls denied any sense of guilt whatever about anything, and he felt that intellectually they actually believed there's no right or wrong, that morality is a relative thing. However, I, as a psychiatrist, know that you cannot rationally do away with the feelings that exist on the irrational, unconscious level. You cannot tell yourself that killing is okay. Intellectually, when you have grown up all your life feeling that killing is wrong. In short, Hodgman believed that as human beings, the girls felt some guilt deep down inside, even though they consciously suppressed it. Keith asked Hodgman, in your opinion, doctor, would Leslie be susceptible or respond to intensive therapy? Possibly. In other words, you don't feel that she is such a lost soul that she could never be rehabilitated. No, I don't think she is that lost a soul, no. To a psychiatrist, no one is beyond redemption. This is essential standard testimony. Yet only one of the defense attorneys, Maxwell Keith, asked the question, and then only on redirect. Earlier, I brought out that Hodgman had only the word of the girls that they were on LSD either night. I now asked him, have you ever read a reported case in the literature of LSD of any individual who committed murder while under the influence of LSD? No. Suicide, but not murder. As I later asked the jury, could Watson, Atkins, Carmichael, and Van Hoon all four be exceptions? A large portion of Hodgman's testimony had dealt with the mental states of three girls. Susan Atkins was suffering from a diagnosable condition. He said an early childhood deprivation syndrome, which had resulted in a hysterical personality type. This was not legal insanity as defined by McNaughton. Leslie Van Houten was an immature, unusually impulsive person who tended to act spontaneously without reflection. Nor was this legal insanity as defined by McNaughton. In this report on Carmichael, Dr. Claude Brown, the mobile psychiatrist, had stated that, at the time I saw Miss Carmichael, she showed a schizophrenic reaction. He added, however, that I do not state with any certainty that this psychosis existed at the time of the alleged murders. Schizophrenia may be legal insanity as defined by McNaughton, but not Brown's opinion was qualified. And when Fitzgerald asked Dr. Hodgman if, on the basis of his examination of Carmichael, he agreed that she was or had been schizophrenic, Hodgman replied, I would say no. It remained to bring these points across to the jury in terms they could easily understand. On recross examination, I asked Hodgman to define the word psychotic. He replied that it meant a loss of contact with reality. I then asked him, at the present time, doctor, do you feel any of these female defendants are psychotic? No. In your opinion, do you feel that any of these three female defendants have ever been psychotic? No. Bugliosi says, may I approach the witness, Your Honor? I want to ask the witness a question privately. The court says, yes, you may. I had already questioned Dr. Hodgman once about this, but I wanted to be absolutely certain of his reply. Once I had received it, I returned to the counsel table and asked him a number of unrelated questions so the jury would know what we had been talking about. I then gradually worked up to the big one. The term insanity, doctor, you are familiar with that term, of course. Yeah. Basically, you define the word insanity to be layman's synonym for psychotic. I would say that the word insanity is generally used to mean psychotic. Then, from a psychiatrist standpoint, I take it that your opinion, none of these three female defendants are presently insane, nor have they ever been insane. Is that correct? That's correct. As far as the psychiatric testimony was concerned, with Hodgman's reply, the ball game was over. The defense called only three more witnesses during the penalty trial, all hardcore family members. Each was on the stand only a short time, but their testimony, particularly that of the first witness, was as shocking as anything that had gone before. Catherine Giles, whose grandmother owned Myers Ranch, parroted the family line. Charlie never led anyone. There was never any talk of race war. These murders were committed to free Bobby Blisway. Coldly, matter-of-factly, the 21-year-old girl testified that on the night of the LaBianca murders, I followed Katie to the car and I asked if I could go with her and Linda. Leslie and Sadie were all in the car. And they said that they had plenty of people to do what they were going to do and that I didn't need to go. On direct examination by Canarak, Kathy stated, I am willing to kill for our brother. We all are. What do you mean by that? In other words, to get our brother out of jail, I would kill. I would have killed that night, except I did not go. What prevented you from going with them, if anything? Just the fact they didn't need me. Apparently, Fitzgerald hoped to soften the harshness of her reply when he asked her, have you killed anybody to get someone out of jail? With a strange little smile, Kathy turned her head and, looking directly at the jury, replied, not yet. That's scary. There wasn't much out there about mental health back in the day. It was taboo in the day. Yeah, that I would understand. Because this was, the 70s now we're at? Yeah, 71. Kathy had testified on direct examination that Katie had told her about the Tate LaBianca murders. On cross-examination, I asked her, when Katie told you that they had murdered these people, did this disturb you at all? Actually, it had very little effect on me because I knew why they had done it. So it didn't upset you? No, it definitely didn't upset me. You didn't decide you would rather not continue living with murderers? Obviously not. Were you upset that you didn't get to go along with them? I wanted to go. Mary Brenner, first member of the Manson family, claimed that the police had told her that she would be charged with murder if she did not implicate Manson in the Hinman slaying. Now, she repudiated this testimony and further denied even being at the Hinman residence. Keith brought out that Mary Brenner had testified both in the second trial of Bobby Beausoleil and before the Hinman grand jury, and neither time did she say anything about Leslie Van Houten being present when Hinman was killed. I had no questions for her. The point was made. Brenda McCann was recalled to the stand to testify that on the nights of the Tate LaBianca murders, she had seen Manson sleeping with Stephanie Scram in Devil's Canyon. The groundwork for my cross-examination of Brenda had been laid 15 months before. I impeached her with a testimony before the grand jury when she stated that she couldn't remember where she or Manson was on either night. Brenda was the last witness. She completed her testimony on Tuesday, March 16, 1971. That afternoon, after a number of delays, Canarak, for example, refused to stipulate that Gary Hinman was dead. The defense rested. Wednesday, we worked on the jury instructions, and on Thursday, the trial entered its final stage. All that now remained were the arguments, the deliberations, and the verdict. I didn't see these pictures. All right, March 18th to the 29th, 1971. Oh, shit. Almost fell. My opening argument in the penalty trial was brief, lasting less than 10 minutes. As with all my arguments during the trial, Manson decided to sit this one out in the lockup. The psychology behind this was obvious. He didn't want the jury focusing on him when I discussed him. I began by saying I'm not going to address myself to the frantic effort by the three female defendants and the defense witnesses to make it look like Charles Manson wasn't involved in these murders. I am sure all of you clearly saw that. They were relying on the witness stand to do what they could for their god, Charles Manson. Well, Charles Manson had already been convicted. He has already been convicted of 7 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. The difficulty in your decision, as I see it, is not whether these defendants deserve the death penalty, ladies and gentlemen. In view of the incredibly savage, barbaric, and inhuman murders they committed, the death penalty is the only proper verdict. I then stated the very heart of my argument. If this case were not a proper case for the imposition of the death penalty, no case ever would be. In view of what they did, life imprisonment would be the greatest gift, the greatest charity, the greatest handout, as it were ever given. The difficulty in your decision, as I see it, is whether you will have the fortitude to return verdicts of death against all 4 defendants. The defense attorneys, I anticipated, would beg for their clients' lives. This was not only commendable, I told the jury, it was also understandable. Just that it was understandable that they argued during the guilt phase that their clients were not involved in these murders, even though during the penalty phase, the 3 female defendants took the stand and said, yes, we were involved. There was absolutely no reason for the defendants to viciously and inhumanely snuff out the lives of these 7 human beings, I noted. There were no mitigating circumstances. These defendants are not human beings, ladies and gentlemen. Human beings have a heart and a soul. No one with a heart and a soul could have done what these defendants did to these 7 victims. These defendants are human monsters, human mutations. There's only one proper ending to the Tate LaBianca murder trial. I concluded verdicts of death for all 4 defendants. Kanarek stipulated at the start of his argument that Mr. Manson is not all good. Obviously, he isn't good at all. Holy. So Kanarek stipulated at the start of his argument that Mr. Manson is not all good. However, he continued, Mr. Manson is innocent of these matters that are before us. Why was he on trial then? Kanarek returned to his 2 favorite themes. Mr. Manson has had quite a share of troubles because of the fact that he likes girls. And he was only brought to trial so someone in the district attorney's office can have a gold star and say, I got Charles Manson. This guy's a douche. Kanarek's argument stretched over 3 days. It was occasionally ridiculous, as when he said, we can perform a public service for the United States of America by giving these people life, because if there's a revolution, this is the kind of thing that could spark it. It was sometimes unintentionally funny, as when he stated that, unlike Patricia Carmichael and Leslie Van Houten, Charles Manson has no family to come here to testify. But mostly he tried to plant little seeds of doubt. Why, if Susan Atkins lied on the stand to absolve Manson, would she have implicated him in the Hinman murder? Wasn't the fact that Manson himself shot Crow to protect the people at Spawn Ranch evidence that he didn't need to order others to act for him? If these girls were lying about Manson's non-involvement in the murders, wouldn't they have also lied and said they had sorrow and remorse? Kanarek only briefly mentioned the copycat motive. He didn't even try to argue it. Instead, he suggested still another alternative motive. But for the fact that at least some of these people, supposedly referring to the Tate victims, were engaged in a narcotic episode of some type, these events would not have taken place. Dave Shen, who argued next, fastened on Dr. Hutchman's statement that he believed these girls had subconscious, if not conscious, remorse. As for Susan, she's still young, Shin argued. She's only 22 years old. I believe there's still hope of rehabilitating her. Maybe someday she may be rehabilitated to the extent that she may finally realize that what she has done was not right. I believe she deserves the chance, an opportunity, so that maybe someday she may be released and live the rest of her life at a prison. This was very bad strategy on Shin's part, implying that if Susan Atkins was given life imprisonment, she might someday be released on parole. By law, the prosecution can't argue this. It is so prejudicial to the defendant. Oh, worry. Of the 4 defense attorneys, Maxwell Keith gave the best opening argument. He was also the only one who really attempted to reboot my contentions. Mr. Bugliosi tells you, Mr. Bugliosi read to you at the close of his argument on the guilt phase the roll call of the dead. Let me read to you now. Ladies and gentlemen, the roll call of the living dead: Leslie, Sadie, Katie, Squeaky, Brenda, Sandy, Kathy, Gypsy, Tex, Holy, Clem, Mary, Snake, and no doubt many more. These lives and the lives of these 3 young girls in particular have been so damaged that it is possible in some cases their destruction is beyond repair. I hope not, but it's possible. Leslie Van Houten, he strongly argued, was capable of rehabilitation. She should be studied, not killed. I'm not asking you to forgive her, although to forgive is divine. I'm asking you to give her the chance to redeem herself. She deserves to live, and what she did was not done by the real Leslie. Let the Leslie of today die. She will slowly and maybe painfully. And let the Leslie as she once was live again. Nowhere in Paul Fitzgerald's argument, which followed, did he say or even imply that Manson was responsible for what happened to Patricia Carmichael. Patricia Carmichael is 23 years old, Fitzgerald observed. With 365 days in the year, there are approximately 8,400 days in 23 years, and approximately 200,000 hours in her lifetime. The perpetration of these offenses took at the best approximately 3 hours. Is she to be judged solely on what occurred during 3 of the 200,000 hours? Okay. Just before court commenced, on March 23rd, I walked over to the water cooler. Manson in the nearby lockup called out to me, rather loudly. If I get the death penalty, there's going to be a lot of bloodletting, because I'm not going to take it. Both the court clerk and Steve Kate overheard the remark. Kate immediately rushed out of the courtroom and repeated it to the press. Learning of this, I asked the reporters not to print it. The Herald Examiner wouldn't agree, and it broke the story with a banner headline: Manson death threat, warns of terror if doomed to die. Before this, however, Judge Older, made aware of what had happened, decided that rather than wait to the close of arguments, he would sequester the jury immediately. I think I'm going to end it there. I'm actually getting a sore throat. Ugh. You're 18? Oh, wow. Yeah, like a lot when we were younger and stuff. I was born in the 80s. I think you were too, Brittany. Yeah, they didn't know a lot about mental issues, I'll call them. So we are almost on this book. This is the last chapter. And then, let me see if I can get this. Hold on, let me make sure. Yeah, it's the last chapter. And then we're on the epilogue. Okay, so this just shows out. This is just reading after they were sentenced. And he called it a shared madness. So this epilogue and then the afterwards, kind of long, but I'm a 67 baby and they were ashamed of me, period. That's awful. Fuck them. It's not right. I think that's been my word of the day, is fuck them. Do you guys have any questions or anything? If not, I'm probably just gonna take off. Thanks, Lori. I would accept it if you give me one. I'm exhausted. But I can't be going to bed yet. It's too early. Got to do some dishes because I've been on here all day. I haven't been able to do them. Then I got to get my boy in that shower. Oh, thank you, Sandy. And depression and anxiety at 29. I don't even know what the hell it was. I don't even know what age I was when I started taking medication. I think I was like 18, I think. I think that's what I was, yeah. I started seeing counselors and stuff, even at school when I was 14. That's when I started. You're welcome. What's tomorrow? Tomorrow's Friday. Oh, I do have a stream tomorrow at 7. I'll be discussing the Indigenous children again. And I also want to get on the topic of the Highway of Tears, because that's something I want to discuss, because it's still happening. And I think it needs to be talked about. I had ulcers at 11 when I knew my mom was going to die before I became an adult. Oh, I've got high blood pressure now. Well, I figured out, my doctor and I figured that out when, that was what, 7 years ago? I thought it was like early menopause because I was sweating so much. It was awful, but no, it was high blood pressure. And I talked to him and he's like, yeah, he's like, so you're on all these medications. And he's like, so anxiety, depression, PTSD. He's like, clearly you had a worried life. You worried a lot. I'm like, yeah. He's like, that's probably what caused it. Take off to the Great White North, eh? I really appreciate all your birdies today in the dark. It was really nice. You got me through the rough part of the hurricane. Thank you. I hope it's over for you soon because it is scary looking at it. Just watching the news, it's so scary. I don't even know what I would do. One of my mods, Support Your Troops, he lost his home. People are dead. I mean, it's heartbreaking. Mother Earth can be horrible. All right, guys. You guys have a good night. I got some stuff to do, and then I'm going to go relax with my son. Yeah. I knew a girl in grade 9. She started doing the work. She was oh, wow. Yeah, that's what's going on with this Highway of Tears statistic. That's why I want to talk about it because it's still going on in Canada. It's more racism, you know? It's just gross. It's gotta stop. These are people's lives. Like, same with Robert Pickton, the pig farmer. Yeah, wasn't he a treat? He was killing off prostitutes here in Canada. And because of that, the cops didn't give a shit. It's not right. Okay, I'm going to shut up. I'm going to go. All right, you guys have a great night. I'll be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Oh, did you? Sweet. Thank you, Brenda. You guys have a good night. I'll be back tomorrow at 7. Bye, guys.